Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, we have Jymm Hoffman I'm sorry, I didn't write it down. I forgot to ask you, is it Hoffman Forge? Is that right? Hoffman Forge. Okay, very good. Sorry about that. I usually double check that, and I push the record button. So tell me about your background.
I came into this, as some might say, the long way around the barn. Depends on how far back you want to go. Since I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with myself as a teenager, I decided to go into the machine trades program at a brand new vocational school. And if I didn't like that sort of thing, I'd be able to pay for college that way, because I knew my parents weren't going to pay anything for college. And that's more or less what happened. I got involved with reenacting, as we called it back in the 70s. 75 is when I started doing a bicentennial sort of reenacting.
Oh, yes.
And a lot of people that are more serious about it today prefer to call it living history. And that's really what led me into more or less the thoughts of preservation. I went to school in Salem College, Salem, West Virginia. When I first went there, I started out in the program was called Heritage Arts, and it was more of a craft program at that time. But the background on it was they had a lot of log buildings that were donated to them that they were putting up and trying to save those. So that aspect of preservation, and the friends that took me down there to visit had moved a log house into a woods, and I helped them put it back up. So I was interested in log house preservation at that point.
Right.
And having a historical background as well as a craft background, I wanted to do things as correctly as possible instead of just looking at something that looks kind of like it, sort of deal.
Right, yeah.
And I ran out of money, and I left college in 81 with an associate's degree. I started working at a historic site, and I left there and went on my own, started my own business, and continued the pursuit of the blacksmiths trade and trying to do things as historically correct as possible. And those two kind of kept pushing me towards working with other restorations and reconstructions. And I managed to go back to college in 86 to finish up my bachelor's degree, and they changed the program then to museum studies. So there was collections care, exhibiting, and different aspects added to the craft program to where it was more in line with museum work in that regard.
Yeah.
And that's really what kind of led me down the path. And having been self-employed most of my adult life, I also learned to say yes. I'm still learning how to say no,
Right.
and be as diversified as possible. And so I'm frequently called upon by different organizations or individuals that are wanting to recreate something. And many times I have to provide them with research as well as the product. They don't know exactly what they want. So there's a certain amount of research involved with a lot of the work I do. And whenever possible, I really prefer the client to tell me what they want. And if they're not certain, then we start discussions about what would be more appropriate.
Right, right. And it helps to, I would think sometimes if you're trying to match something that they already have, or, you know, at least a certain style for the house rather than just starting, you know, because sometimes it's hard to get on the same page as somebody else's vision if they can't explain to you what they're really looking for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have different reference materials that I'm able to hand to clients or recommend that they look into if, in the example of a house reconstruction or restoration, there's a couple of books that are still available either through libraries, not so much online right now, as far as I'm not sure where they are in the purchasability right now.
Right.
There's a few of them still out there, but I'll say, well, go check out this book and see if there's items that you like or designs that you want. When it comes to an actual restoration, I prefer to do exact copies of what was there.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and a lot of times, again, even in museum cases, those that are in charge don't always understand exactly what they need. So that's where the research background comes in.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes, especially if there's not an example, you're doing, you know, the best guess based on the region, the style, you know, but nobody knows for sure, especially if it's not there.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of talked about how you got started in preservation and why preservation. When you were working with the initially after your associate's degree with the was it a historical society or what type of work were you doing there?
I was working as a blacksmith at a village.
Okay. So you've got the blacksmith theme has kind of gone through. It's just in different iterations.
Yeah, it's heavy on the forge work as far.
Yeah.
And not as heavy on the research and consultation part.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and that was open to the public 5 days a week, demonstrating just generic whatever.
Right.
Being able to make something quickly in a couple of minutes was the preferred idea instead of any major projects.
Well, somebody can stand there and watch you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me about the work you do now.
It's a huge variety of work. I just finished up this morning tongs for a gunsmith, blacksmith that's working on his own, providing him with tools for his work. Then I'm into making strake nails, which are large-headed nails for cannon wheels. I have an order that's pressing me that I got started on that before lunch. After that, I have cooking utensils and axes and picks. It's just a big variety of work that I've gotten into, and that's part of the staying alive as a small business.
Right.
A lot of variety. 20 years ago, I was doing jackhammer bits for paving companies, redressing them.
Yeah.
They need to be forged back out when they're broken or extremely dull. Forge them back, best thing to do, and then grind them and reharden them. So I don't do very much of that these days, but it's mostly museums and individuals that are either reenactors or have an old house.
Okay. Very good. And do you do, I know we chatted a little bit before, but do you do hardware and things like that also for houses?
Oh, yeah. I can't remember the name of the, there's a cemetery in eastern Pennsylvania. I wish I could remember the name that I did a batch of hinges for that group, saving some of their buildings. the biggest batch of hinges that I did recently was for a new reconstruction of a brewery in Dayton, Ohio, where it was large strap hinges.
Very cool.
Anything from butterfly hinges to 6 foot long strap hinges has been the variety in that department.
Oh yeah, were those doors then so wide, or were they
tall? They were like 12 tall.
Yeah.
Big doors, fort gates, things like that. In fact, kitchen hardware, cooking equipment. A few years ago, I did all the equipment, or most of the equipment, I should say, for the Renfrew Museum that's not too far from where you're working, that's west of Gettysburg.
Okay.
They had an opportunity to move a stone kitchen to their museum, and one of their people contacted me about supplying them with a fireplace crane, and then spiders and trivets and toasters and a whole variety of items. So that gives you an idea of the broad spectrum that I do.
Yes, and that makes sense though that you would make a wide variety of things. Because I think traditionally blacksmiths would have made a wide variety of things.
Pretty much in North America, yes. And part of the research that I've been doing through the years, the first blacksmiths that started me came from an artistic side, saying that blacksmiths don't shoot horses, farriers shoot horses. And the reality of it is, in North America, there was a publication done a number of years ago that's basically somebody's master's project, and I can't remember her name, but she had journals of specifically blacksmiths in Pennsylvania. And the earliest one starting in the late 18th century and a lot into the 19th century. And if you look at the journals of these smiths, a lot of them were shoeing horses as a small part of their business.
Right.
And another friend of mine that did a master's thesis on blacksmith shops in Wisconsin found a similar situation there, that he came up with numbers that people like, stats, that he says about 60% of the business in blacksmiths in the rural areas is repair work. 25%.
That makes sense. Yeah.
25% is shoeing, and the other 15% is making new items. And a lot of people forget we were an agrarian society for so long that the village smithy is going to be doing mostly repair work, occasionally making items.
Well, and it's actually, it's more, it not only is it green, it's also being, more, I can't think of, like, economical. You've bought something that it was of value once, so it makes sense that you're going to repair it rather than just assuming everything's disposable.
Right. Yeah. And in Philadelphia in the 1770 census, there were 100 smiths listed, and a lot of people also fail to remember that it was the largest city at the time in the colonies with 20,000 people. Right. And there were over smiths listed. If you're in a big city, that is where you get to specialize. And that's where people were indeed specializing. And blacksmiths could be just axe makers or just sign makers or whatever. Industrialization is not really kicked in North America yet, but the concept of specializing was nothing new. It came in from Europe as well. But like realtors like to say, location, location, location. That's going to what you do.
That makes sense to me. So, what I know that you kind of came into this not really sure what you were going to do, and you kind of started to fall in love with history and preservation, and went into the trade. But what do you wish that you knew when you started that you know now?
Oh, I was afraid you were going to remember that question. Everybody would love to have the knowledge they have today and go back in time.
Oh, yes.
you know, um, and I'm glad you sent those questions to me, and I've been thinking about it, and that's the hardest one for me to answer.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, if I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't do it.
I completely understand that.
Yeah. Doing a one-man business and doing the starving artist thing and all that other stuff is pretty daunting to look at it. And I've actually talked a couple of young guys out of trying to go into business for themselves because of the reality of it. So in that regards, I'm glad I didn't know. I was just stubborn and bullheaded and said, I'm going to do this.
Right.
And about 15 years ago, I said to some friends of mine that now that I'm getting comfortable with the craft after doing it for about 20 years, I need to work on the business side. And the one friend said, you'll never be good at that. You love what you do too much.
I can believe that too.
That's one of the challenges for an artist crafts person.
Right.
And I'd love to have the skill set in the shop that I have now when I started my business.
Right.
But I didn't.
Yeah. Well, and I think that every project you learn something from.
Yes.
I know that we do, and there's a couple times where we've looked at a solution, to a problem that we would have offered a completely different solution if we hadn't experienced, something else. So you learn from everything you do.
Right. Certainly.
Yeah.
I had a project with a restoration group in central Pennsylvania a few years ago. I had done some hinges and hardware for this guy, and he contacted me and asked me for some specialized nails that he had a real special project. And I said, sure, can you give me more information? And he told me it was a Chinese cannon carriage project. Mm. And to make a long story short, which was really the whole process to me was just fascinating because of the history part of it and everything.
Right.
But we got over there to help them put things together. It really didn't matter that it was Chinese versus English that I'm most conversant with as far as cannon go, 18th century English carriages. I told these guys, okay, we need to put these parts together so that I can make certain metal parts fit. And they're like, okay. And they were really proud. They got it put together. And then I said, okay, now we need to take it apart. And they just looked at me and said, what? I said, trust me. So after a couple of situations like that, they started to trust me and said, there's a whole lot more to putting one of these together than they realized.
Right.
But even though I don't do wood, I know what needed to be done and what process to do things. And it did speed things up for them because they weren't, going through the mistakes we went through when we first started putting carriages together.
Right.
So there is definitely a learning curve. And in some cases, I spend more time figuring out how to make something than actually making it.
Right. And I think I think that a lot of craftspeople go through that where after you have like the whole project figured out and how it all fits together, then you can go in and do it. And it's a lot easier than, not thinking of those steps through and ahead.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. So, do you see any challenges or trends in preservation?
There's continually been challenges for me in educating clients and especially with ironwork. I get really frustrated to find out how much clients are willing to spend on wood parts and trim work and so on. And then they don't want to spend a nickel on hardware.
Right. Yeah, and hardware is so important for everything to work well. Good hardware is, it's I think it's essential.
And sometimes I describe decorative hardware anyways as jewelry for the building.
Yes.
But I've seen too many times where somebody will spend a ton of money on a project and then they just want something bent and painted black and call it colonial. Right. And it's just so frustrating to say, you got it so far, take it the rest of the way.
Right.
And sometimes they just burn up their budget.
Right.
And never hardware.
And there's a huge variety. I mean, it's in everything, but there's a huge variety of hardware. Like not all hardware is equal, and just because it looks the same doesn't mean that it could be plated. It's just some of it. It's just not. The good hardware is worth it. I think it's worth the investment, because you're not going to have to buy new hardware. Then it's not going to wear out.
Right, and that's sometimes very hard to get through to clients.
Yeah.
Museums really, really frustrate me at times for that, when they fall into that trap. And the other trend that I would like to see changed is, especially in the museum world, but it can be applied to private individuals as well, is using old iron on a new project, or using old blacksmiths tools in a new shop where they're going to be demonstrating. And it's just because it's an old piece of whatever doesn't necessarily mean it's historically correct for that setting.
Right. Yeah.
And if it is historically correct, this is where my museum training comes in. You shouldn't use it. If it's gonna rip, wear and tear, or the weather, you shouldn't be using it. You should be displaying it in a preserved setting.
Right.
But I don't care if it is an anvil, but if you're going to use an anvil, it shouldn't, one, look like it's 250 years old and beat the snot out of, and two, you can damage it. It might take more than other objects you're used to dealing with.
Right.
But you damage it, and that's a one-of-a-kind item.
It is.
Even though there's a bunch of them out there, it's a one-of-a-kind item that you should preserve it, make it available to be studied for copying, put it on display, and that can be anything from tools to hardware to cooking utensils or whatever. Don't use it.
Yeah.
Display it, sure.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, especially in like a demonstration kind of setting where you're going to continually use them, and yeah, they could break. I mean, and if they are, period appropriate, they should be, displayed where people aren't using them. That makes sense to me from a preservation standpoint too, because once that's broken, it could be repaired possibly, but it's not going to be the same as it was.
Right. And but it's just iron. It'll last forever. It's gonna last a lot longer than that garment you're studying, sure, but
right. Yeah.
It has a lifespan as well. And it could be indefinitely if you can if you put it in the right setting.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the trends I would like to see go beyond some of the major museums and into the smaller museums. I think the major museums are much better about that attitude.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So is there anything that you wanted to cover that maybe I forgot to ask you about, or that you thought of while we were talking?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, how can our listeners contact you?
I actually prefer email.
Okay.
Over phone calls.
Sure.
And my email address is JYMM Hoffman, HOFFMAN, @hoffmansforge.com. And there's an S after Hoffman.
Okay. Yes, and we'll make sure that's also on our website where the podcast episode will be, with the kind of the synopsis, so that if people listen and didn't get a chance to write it down, they can go there to find it too.
Sure.
So, did you have anything that you'd like to promote? I did see that you usually do educational seminars, but I'm sure those are on hold for right now.
Yeah, those are pretty much on hold these days. Well, the other thing that I do is consultations for setting up a blacksmith shop at historic sites. And whether it be a consultation or even helping supply the correct tooling, I don't know if you heard the truck going by in the background. It's in the industrial park where the shop is. But consultations, I've helped several museums set up blacksmith shops, and I continue to do that sort of work as well as provide tooling, the hardware, and so on.
Very, very cool. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know that you have a busy production schedule, so I'm glad we could get this fit in while you're, in between projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where will it be or broadcast?
Oh.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.